The year was 1730, in the small town of Magdeburg, Prussia, a land ruled by discipline, steel, and the iron will of kings. From the first breath he took, Friedrich Wilhelm August Heinrich Ferdinand von Steuben was born into a world where war was not just a profession, it was a way of life. His father, a Prussian engineer officer, raised him in the heart of Frederick the Great's army, where honor was measured not by bloodline but by endurance, obedience, and courage. As a boy, young Friedrich would watch soldiers drill in perfect formation outside the garrisons, their movements timed like clockwork, their muskets gleaming under the cold Prussian sun. That precision would etch itself into his soul. He wasn't born into wealth, but into order, and that order would become his religion. By the time he was 17, von Steuben entered military service under King Frederick the Great, the most formidable general of his era. The Prussian army was legendary, a machine of iron discipline that struck fear across Europe. And inside that machine, von Steuben found his calling. He wasn't a man of gentle words or soft gestures. He was sharp, commanding, and exact, a perfectionist in a world that demanded nothing less. His blue eyes carried the cold precision of a soldier who demanded the impossible, first from himself and then from others. As a young officer, he fought in the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the century. Von Steuben proved himself on the battlefields of Europe, where Prussia's survival hung by a thread. He faced cannon fire, bayonet charges, and nights spent in frostbitten trenches. But more than bravery, he learned something few officers did, the art of discipline as salvation. He realized that men didn't win wars through courage alone, they won through training, trust, and unity. By the time the war ended, von Steuben had earned the rank of captain and had seen both glory and despair. Europe was changing, the great monarchs played their chess of blood, and the soldiers were the pawns. But von Steuben, with his proud bearing and relentless work ethic, believed he was destined for more. He served briefly as chamberlain to a small German prince, a ceremonial post far beneath his skills. For a man who had led men through cannon fire, sitting in silks and courtly games was a humiliation. He longed for purpose again, for the sound of drums, the smell of gunpowder, the brotherhood of soldiers. Then fate intervened. Through whispers in European courts, von Steuben heard of a rebellion across the ocean, a nation of farmers, blacksmiths, and dreamers rising against the most powerful empire on earth. The American colonies had declared independence from Britain. But they were not an army, they were a collection of militias, brave but undisciplined. And there, perhaps, lay his destiny. He met Benjamin Franklin in Paris, who immediately recognized the fire behind his sharp military eyes. The Americans needed discipline, order, and expertise, everything that ran through von Steuben's veins. Franklin saw what many couldn't, that this Prussian officer could forge Washington's men into something greater, a true army. Yet, von Steuben's path to America was not gilded with honor. He had no money, no commission, and was tainted by rumors. Political enemies back in Europe had slandered his name, accusing him of misconduct to ruin his reputation. With little left in Prussia but a tarnished honor, he made a decision that would change the course of American history. He sold what little he had, boarded a ship with only his loyal aide-de-camp and a dog, and crossed the Atlantic. The voyage was cold, long, and uncertain, but von Steuben's heart burned with new purpose. He wasn't going to be just another soldier in exile. He was going to build an army. When his ship finally touched the shores of New Hampshire in December 1777, the man who stepped onto American soil was not a broken officer. He was a warrior reborn, ready to turn chaos into order, to mold farmers into soldiers, and to breathe steel into the spirit of a young nation. He spoke little English, but his presence spoke louder than any words. A tall, broad-shouldered figure in his blue Prussian uniform, his eyes blazing with command. America didn't yet know it, but the man who had just landed would soon teach them how to stand, march, and fight like an army that could face the might of Britain. The iron soul of Prussia had just arrived to forge the heart of America. The Prussian wind cut sharp across the courtyards of Potsdam, whispering through stone arches where once the boots of proud soldiers had thundered. For Baron Friedrich von Steuben, that sound, once a call of glory, had turned into a haunting echo of everything he had lost. After the 7 Years' War, Europe had entered a strange peace, a peace for kings, not soldiers. The battle-hardened men who had once bled for crowns were now dismissed, forgotten, or cast aside. Von Steuben, once hailed for his discipline and precision, suddenly found himself without command, without purpose, and, most painfully, without recognition. He was still only in his 40s, strong, sharp, proud, yet his future had already begun to close in on him like the walls of a forgotten fortress. In the royal courts of Europe, favor was everything. You could survive any scandal if you had the right friends, and be destroyed without a single proof if you didn't. Von Steuben had made enemies, powerful ones. His Prussian discipline, his refusal to flatter, his blunt, cold honesty made him respected on the battlefield but hated in the salons of power. Whispers began to circle. He is too harsh. He is difficult. He is a man out of place. And soon, whispers turned to daggers. By the early 1770s, a shadow had fallen over his reputation. False accusations, political rumors spread by rivals who sought to ruin him. They didn't accuse him of incompetence. No one dared, but they attacked his honor, the one thing he valued above life itself. He left Prussia in silence, dignity wounded but not dead. For a time, he drifted through Europe, first to France, then to the small court of Prince Joseph of Hohenzollern-Hechingen, where he was appointed chamberlain. But the court life, balls, diplomacy, flattery, suffocated him. This was not a man built for idle conversation. He belonged to the clash of muskets and the thunder of cannons. He would walk the palace gardens at night, his boots crunching through gravel, thinking not of comfort or wealth but of purpose. What was the worth of a soldier without an army? What was the use of knowledge, forged in fire, if it was to rust in silence? Then came 1777, the year destiny knocked. In Paris, the city hummed with whispers of revolution, not in Europe, but across the ocean. 13 colonies had dared to rise against the mighty British Empire. The American struggle was both madness and miracle. Their army, under General George Washington, was brave but broken, half-starved, untrained, and disorganized. They needed something Europe had perfected: discipline. Von Steuben's name reached the ears of Benjamin Franklin, who was serving as America's ambassador in France. Franklin, ever the judge of character, saw in von Steuben not a disgraced officer, but a potential savior. He knew this man's experience under Frederick the Great, his genius for drill and structure, could turn the chaos of militias into a true fighting force. But America could not pay him. Congress had no money, no gold, not even uniforms for its own soldiers. All they could offer von Steuben was a promise, and a dream. And yet, when Franklin handed him the letter of introduction to Washington, von Steuben didn't hesitate. He saw beyond the poverty, beyond the uncertainty. He saw hope. A nation fighting for freedom was something new under the sun. Not for a king, not for an empire, but for liberty. And to von Steuben, who had spent a lifetime serving crowns that never cared for their men, this was something pure. He sold his few possessions, gathered what little remained of his pride, and wrote to Franklin, "I wish to serve America not for fortune, but for honor." In September 1777, he boarded a ship called Le Flamand at Marseilles, accompanied by his loyal aide-de-camp Pierre-Étienne du Ponceau, his Italian greyhound Azor, and a heart full of defiant fire. The voyage was long and cruel. Storms rocked the vessel, supplies ran low. Yet every night, von Steuben stood on deck beneath the stars, staring westward, imagining the land that awaited him, not as a place of exile, but as the soil where he could rebuild his soul. He was 47 when he arrived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in December 1777. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a worn blue uniform, his silver hair swept back, his sword still gleaming from Prussian campaigns. When he met Washington's officers at York, Pennsylvania, they didn't know what to make of him. He spoke no English, only French and German. His title, Baron, sounded foreign and suspicious. But when he stood before them, posture rigid, gaze unflinching, even the skeptics felt it. This man carried the gravity of command. Soon after, Washington himself received him. In that cold, makeshift camp, the two men, one from Virginia's plantations, the other from Prussia's iron ranks, shook hands. Two worlds met, the dream of freedom and the science of war. Washington saw through von Steuben's broken English and polished titles. He saw the soldier. In turn, von Steuben saw in Washington the rarest of leaders, a man who listened, who cared more for his men than for his image. There, in the heart of winter, as snow fell across the desperate encampment of Valley Forge, the Prussian warrior found his battlefield once more. The soldiers were starving, barefoot, dying from cold and disease. Their morale was shattered, their discipline non-existent. Von Steuben rode among them, eyes hard but heart burning. He saw not failure, but raw potential. These men were rough, but their courage was pure. They didn't need punishment, they needed purpose. And so, with Washington's blessing, he set out to do what no one had done before, to forge an army out of chaos. The old Prussian wolf had found his pack again. And soon, the world would witness a transformation that would echo through history, the rebirth of the Continental Army, trained by a foreigner who believed in their dream more fiercely than many of their own. The winter of 1777 to 1778 was not merely cold, it was merciless. At Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, the American army, ragged, starving, and half-broken, clung to life in the snow. Their feet wrapped in rags, their bellies empty, their spirits fading. Death was not a stranger there. It was a constant companion that visited every night. The war for independence had come to a standstill. Britain's armies occupied Philadelphia, warm and fed, while Washington's men suffered in silence, living in log huts that barely kept out the wind. The dream of liberty was freezing to death in those hills. Then one morning, through the gray mist and biting frost, a tall, broad-shouldered man rode into camp. His uniform was old but dignified, deep blue trimmed with silver, polished buttons glinting faintly in the pale sun. His bearing was that of a soldier carved from stone. Behind him trotted a small dog, and beside him his aide-de-camp, translating every word from French. The soldiers watched him curiously. Some laughed. Others whispered. Who was this foreigner, dressed like a general, striding through the snow with such pride when everyone else could barely stand? This was Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, the man who had come across an ocean to save an army. At first, his arrival was met with confusion. He had no official rank, no pay, and spoke no English. But Washington saw the glimmer of something rare, authority without arrogance, mastery without cruelty. And so, he made a decision that would change the destiny of his army. Von Steuben would serve as Inspector General, charged with bringing order to the chaos. And so began one of the most extraordinary transformations in military history. Von Steuben began his work the very next morning. He walked through the camp, inspecting weapons, watching the men eat, sleep, and drill. What he saw shocked even him. Muskets caked in rust. Bayonets bent or missing. Soldiers who didn't know how to march in formation or even how to clean their weapons properly. Each regiment used different commands. Every officer taught his men differently. There was no system, no coordination, just courage and confusion. But von Steuben did not mock them. He saw in their chaos a spark waiting to be shaped. He chose a group of 120 men, strong, alert, and willing to learn. These would be his model company, the seed from which discipline would spread across the entire army. Out on the frozen parade ground, he began their training. He barked orders in German. Voraus! Achtung! Then repeated them in broken French, while his aide translated into English. It was chaotic at first, almost comical. The men stumbled, misunderstood, even laughed. But von Steuben laughed with them. He swore in German, threw his hat on the ground, and then, with fiery patience, showed them again, step by step, until they moved as one. He trained them to march in perfect line, to load and fire their muskets with mechanical precision, to fix bayonets with speed and confidence. He drilled them on how to maneuver in formation, how to hold ranks even under cannon fire. He wasn't teaching soldiers, he was forging professionals. And something remarkable happened. The men began to respect him, not because he demanded it, but because he earned it. They saw a man who worked harder than anyone else. He inspected their huts, corrected officers without cruelty, and shared their hardships. When food ran short, he ate what they ate. When the cold bit through his coat, he didn't complain. This foreigner, who could barely speak their language, spoke to them in the universal language of courage and honor. As weeks passed, the snow-covered fields of Valley Forge began to echo not with groans of despair, but with a rhythmic stomp of boots, the sound of unity. Washington himself would often stand at a distance, watching the drills. For the first time, he saw an army taking shape before his eyes, not ragged men clutching muskets, but soldiers who moved like one heartbeat. Von Steuben's methods were revolutionary. He simplified complex European tactics into practical steps that farmers and tradesmen could master. He created a new drill manual, dictating instructions as his aides translated and wrote, a book that would later become the Blue Book, the foundation of U.S. military training for decades to come. He rewrote the soul of the Continental Army. And when spring came, the transformation was complete. The same soldiers who had stumbled through snow months earlier now marched with iron precision. Their weapons gleamed, their faces were steady, their movements sharp and synchronized. Visitors to the camp could hardly believe these were the same men who had nearly starved to death that winter. Von Steuben didn't just teach them how to fight, he taught them how to believe in themselves. In May 1778, news arrived that France had officially allied with the American cause. Washington ordered a grand review of his army, the first true display of their new strength. Von Steuben commanded the drills, his voice thunderous, his commands crisp and clear. Line after line of soldiers moved in perfect harmony, muskets flashing in the sun, bayonets catching the light like silver flames. The once tattered army now looked like the professional legions of Europe. As cannon fire saluted the French alliance, von Steuben stood tall beside Washington. The two men exchanged a look, no words, just mutual pride. For Washington, this was proof that his dream could survive. For von Steuben, it was redemption, the rebirth of a soldier who had lost everything, only to find immortality on foreign soil. From that day, the army no longer feared the British. They had discipline, unity, and purpose. They had become what von Steuben had promised, an army capable of defeating an empire. And in the quiet that followed, when the drills ended and the soldiers returned to their huts, von Steuben would sometimes walk alone along the ridges of Valley Forge. The wind carried the echoes of musket drills, and for the first time in many years, he felt peace. The Prussian warrior had finally found a home, not of birth, but of belief. When the snow of Valley Forge finally melted, the army that emerged was not the same one that had entered. Gone were the hollow eyes and broken ranks. In their place stood soldiers with squared shoulders, gleaming muskets, and a steady rhythm in their step, men who could look their enemy in the eye and no longer flinch. At the heart of this transformation stood Baron Friedrich von Steuben, the iron-hearted Prussian who had turned desperation into discipline. Washington's army was now ready to move. The year was 1778, and British forces had begun withdrawing from Philadelphia, retreating across New Jersey toward New York. Washington decided to strike. The opportunity to test the new army had come. The battle that would prove von Steuben's miracle began under the blazing June sun, the Battle of Monmouth. On June 28, 1778, near the fields of Monmouth Courthouse, New Jersey, the heat was suffocating. Soldiers fainted by the dozens, their uniforms drenched in sweat. Yet amidst that burning chaos, von Steuben rode along the lines, his deep voice booming commands across the ranks. "Steady, men! Hold your line! Advance, together!" He was no longer the foreigner from Europe who needed a translator. The soldiers now understood him perfectly, through his tone, his gestures, his fire. The British, confident from their past victories, expected the American army to scatter like before. But this time, they met something new, an army that didn't break. Under heavy fire, von Steuben's drills came alive. The men loaded, aimed, and fired in perfect rhythm, 3 rounds per minute, exactly as he had taught them. When cavalry attacked, they pivoted as one, bayonets ready, ranks unbroken. Washington, galloping across the field, watched with pride. This was not the ragtag force of 1776. This was the Continental Army, reborn under the fire of discipline. The battle raged for hours under the merciless sun, cannon smoke drifting over scorched grass. Both sides claimed victory by day's end, but Washington's army, once the symbol of disarray, now stood tall against the finest professional army in the world. Monmouth wasn't just a battle. It was a declaration, proof that America could stand toe-to-toe with Britain. And much of that victory belonged to the man who had given them order, Baron von Steuben. After Monmouth, von Steuben's reputation soared. He became one of Washington's most trusted officers, not for titles or politics, but for pure ability. Wherever the army camped, von Steuben's methods followed: strict inspections, efficient drills, and unshakable standards. He rewrote the army's entire code of conduct, the way they camped, marched, and even cleaned their weapons. His regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States, known as the Blue Book, became the foundation of the U.S. military system. Every command, every maneuver, every inspection procedure in the book carried his unmistakable precision and his relentless demand for excellence. And unlike many European officers who looked down on common soldiers, von Steuben treated the men with an unusual mix of respect and discipline. He swore like a soldier, laughed like one, and punished only when necessary. The men adored him. They called him the Old Baron. But his greatest challenge was yet to come, the Southern Campaign. By 1780, the war had shifted south. The British captured Charleston, and the Continental Army suffered brutal defeats. Washington sent von Steuben to Virginia to organize supplies, recruit soldiers, and train militias. There, he faced an even more chaotic situation: untrained farmers, little ammunition, and no system of command. But von Steuben didn't complain. He started over, again, building from the ground up. He established depots, drilled local troops, and forged order out of disorder. It was during this campaign that he worked closely with General Nathanael Greene and Marquis de Lafayette, coordinating reinforcements that would ultimately play a vital role in the Yorktown Campaign, the decisive moment of the war. By the time 1781 arrived, von Steuben's methods had become the backbone of the Continental Army. When Washington began moving south toward Yorktown, it was von Steuben's organization that ensured the troops were ready, drilled, supplied, and disciplined. And when the French Navy closed off the Chesapeake Bay, trapping the British under General Cornwallis, the American army marched with precision, not as scattered militias, but as a united, professional force. As cannons roared and trenches closed around the British positions, von Steuben stood beside Washington and Lafayette, inspecting every movement, every artillery battery, every order. His keen eye missed nothing. The siege of Yorktown was the culmination of everything he had worked for, an army born from chaos now besieging one of the most powerful forces on earth. When Cornwallis finally surrendered on October 19, 1781, the war was effectively over. The United States of America had won its independence. As the captured British troops marched out to lay down their arms, von Steuben stood watching, silent, proud, his uniform still immaculate. He had not fired a shot that day, but his fingerprints were on every victory that led to this moment. He had done more than trained soldiers. He had given birth to a new military tradition, one that would outlive kings and empires. After the war, von Steuben was a hero in name, but not in wealth. Congress had promised him money, land, and recognition, but the new nation was poor and slow to repay its debts. He lived modestly, first in New York, then in Pennsylvania, and finally in upstate New York, where he was granted a small estate. There, the great Prussian warrior lived quietly, surrounded by friends and veterans who loved him. He never married, never sought fame, and never returned to Europe. He had found his home in the land he helped to free. And when he died in 1794, his body was wrapped in his blue military cloak, the same one he had worn through Valley Forge and Monmouth, and laid to rest beneath the open American sky. No royal parade, no Prussian anthem, just the silent gratitude of a nation. Baron Friedrich von Steuben, the exile who crossed an ocean with nothing but courage and knowledge, left behind something greater than victory. He left behind a legacy of order, strength, and discipline that became the backbone of the United States Army. His name, carved into history, stands as a bridge between two worlds, the old world of kings and the new world of freedom. When the smoke of revolution finally cleared, and the United States emerged as a new nation, the name Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben was etched deep in its foundation, not through political ambition or fame, but through discipline, order, and a relentless belief in excellence. After the revolution, von Steuben didn't chase glory or wealth. Instead, he worked tirelessly to codify the very structure of the American military. His greatest contribution came in 1779, the Blue Book, officially titled Regulations for the Order and Discipline of the Troops of the United States. This manual was more than ink on parchment. It was a masterpiece of strategy and organization, a written soul of the Continental Army. Every drill, every maneuver, every command was simplified, clear, and practical, designed for a young, untrained army that had now proven its worth against the world's greatest empire. For decades, this book remained the U.S. Army's official guide, shaping military doctrine long after his death. Von Steuben continued serving the nation with dignity and humility. Though he faced financial hardships and struggled for recognition, the men he had trained never forgot him. Generals and soldiers alike called him the drill master of the Revolution. His students carried his discipline into every battlefield of America's future. His spirit marched through generations. He became a U.S. citizen, settled in New York, and spent his later years mentoring younger officers and helping organize the new nation's defense. Even in retirement, von Steuben carried himself like the Prussian soldier he once was, his bearing noble, his eyes still sharp, and his words always marked with precision. When he passed away in 1794, he was buried with military honors, and American soldiers, those who once struggled to stand in formation, stood proudly in ranks of perfection, their posture a silent tribute to the man who taught them how to be soldiers. Today, Baron von Steuben is remembered as the architect of American military discipline, a European warrior who crossed the ocean not for power or fame, but to help build freedom's army. His name lives on in statues, towns, and even schools across the United States, but his true monument stands every time an American soldier salutes, marches, or follows an order with precision and pride. For it was von Steuben who taught them that discipline is not just control, it's the soul of victory. He didn't just train an army. He built a nation's strength.